I never thought the most painful words of my life would come from my own daughter. She said them one day before her wedding, when she told me I wasn't part of her real family. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Turn on the notification bell because we have new stories every day. Leave your like and tell us in the comments which city you are watching from. My name is Michael Miller. I'm 62 years old, and for decades I believed I had raised the perfect daughter. Sarah was always my little princess, especially after we lost her mother, Rose, 3 years ago from complications with diabetes. Rose had been the love of my life, and when she died, Sarah became the only thing I had left in this world. I worked my whole life as a carpenter, with these calloused hands, building furniture and repairing homes to give my family a decent life. We weren't rich, but we never lacked anything. Sarah studied in good schools, had her teenage whims, and was always treated like the princess she was to me. Everything changed when Sarah turned 23 and met Daniel Reed at a college party. This young man came from a wealthy family in Chicago. His father, Albert Reed, owned several import businesses, and his mother, Linda Reed, was one of those women who flaunted her jewelry at every social event. From the first day Sarah told me about him, I noticed something different in her eyes. A kind of fascination I had never seen before. At first I thought it was normal, first serious love and all that, but gradually my Sarah began to change. The visits home became less frequent. When she did come, she wasn't the same affectionate girl who would sit with me to watch TV or help me in the workshop on Sundays. Now she arrived wearing expensive clothes. She spoke differently, using words I had to look up in the dictionary. "Dad, you just don't get the world today," she would tell me when I asked about her new friends. "Things have changed. You have to adapt to certain social circles." Rose, before she died, had warned me about this. "Michael," she told me one afternoon while I was caring for her in the hospital, "our Sarah is growing up, and the world out there can be cruel to people like us. Promise me you'll always love her, no matter what happens. But never let her disrespect you." Those words echoed in my mind every time Sarah came home, talking about the Reeds as if they were American royalty. She would tell me about their houses, their trips, their business connections. And every time she did, I felt smaller in her eyes. The definitive change came when Sarah and Daniel decided to get engaged after 2 years of dating. It was January 2023 when she announced the news, but something in the way she said it made me feel like I was more of an obligation than part of the celebration. "Dad, Daniel and I are getting married," she said, staring at her phone without even looking up at me. "That's wonderful, my girl," I replied, trying to hug her, but she subtly pulled away. "Yeah, well, it's going to be a big wedding. The Reeds know a lot of important people." That sentence hurt me more than I could express at the time. The following months were like watching my own daughter vanish before my eyes. Sarah was no longer the same person I had raised for 26 years. Every conversation centered on the wedding preparations, but I felt like an outside spectator watching a stranger's life. "The Reeds have booked the ballroom at the Majestic Hotel," she would comment while reviewing endless lists on her laptop. "Linda says it will be the wedding of the year in Chicago. Businessmen, politicians, very influential people are coming." I would nod and smile, but inside something was breaking. Every time she mentioned Linda or Albert as if they were her real parents, I felt a stab in my heart. This woman who had called me daddy her entire childhood now spoke of me as if I were a distant relative. The visits became even more spaced out. Sarah claimed she was very busy with the preparations. The dress fittings, the tastings, the flowers. I tried to participate, to ask if I could help with anything, but I always got the same answer. "Don't worry, Dad. We have everything under control." One Saturday in March 2024, I decided to surprise her by visiting her apartment. I brought some shelves I had made especially for her, thinking she might like them for her new home with Daniel. When I arrived, I found Sarah, Daniel, and Linda Reed sitting around the dining room table, surrounded by catalogs and decoration samples. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, clearly uncomfortable with my unexpected presence. "I wanted to bring you these shelves I made for you," I replied, carrying the wooden pieces I had polished for weeks. Linda looked me up and down with that fake smile she had perfected over years of social events. "What a rustic detail," she commented, and I could sense the disdain in her voice. Daniel didn't even get up to greet me. "Thanks, Michael, but we already ordered all the furniture from an Italian designer. These don't go with the style we're looking for." Sarah said nothing. Absolutely nothing in my defense. She just sat there, ashamed of her own father. That night I returned home with the shelves in my truck, feeling more alone than ever since Rose's death. I sat in our old armchair and looked at the family photographs decorating the living room. There was Sarah at 5, riding on my shoulders at the state fair. At 10, proudly showing me her report card. At 15, hugging me after her high school graduation. When exactly had I lost my daughter? The last few months before the wedding were a silent torment. Sarah barely called me, and when she did, the conversations were mechanical, as if she were fulfilling a family obligation. I kept working in my workshop, but every piece of furniture I built reminded me of those rejected shelves, of that look of shame in my own daughter's eyes. April 2024 arrived, and the wedding invitations began to circulate among family and friends. I waited for mine with excitement, thinking that perhaps in that special moment Sarah would remember who had always been by her side. But the days passed, and nothing arrived in my mailbox. I decided to ask her directly during one of her rare phone calls. "Sarah, honey, when are you going to give me the details for the wedding? It's getting close and I need to get my suit ready." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Dad, about that. We need to talk." My heart started to beat faster. "Talk about what?" "It's just, the wedding is going to be very elegant, very formal. The Reeds have certain standards, and, Sarah, I'm your father. What standards could possibly matter more than that? It's not that simple, Dad. Linda says the guest list has to be very select, only people who fit the atmosphere we want to create." Those words hit me like a hammer to the chest. "Are you telling me I don't fit in at my own daughter's wedding?" "Don't say it like that, Dad. It's just your job, the way you dress, the way you talk. It doesn't go with what we've planned." In that moment, I knew I had definitively lost Sarah. The confirmation came on the afternoon of Friday, May 10th, 2024, exactly one day before the ceremony. Sarah appeared at my door without warning, something she hadn't done in months. For a moment, my heart filled with hope, thinking she had come to apologize, to personally invite me to her wedding, to remember that I was her dad. But when I saw her cold, distant expression, I knew she had come to permanently bury our relationship. "Dad, I came to clear things up once and for all," she said, remaining standing in the doorway, without even crossing the threshold of the house where she had grown up. "Come in, honey, sit down." "Do you want some coffee?" I offered, trying to maintain normalcy despite the knot forming in my throat. "No, I don't have time. My wedding is tomorrow and there are many details to oversee." She stood by the door, as if my own house would contaminate her. "I wanted to explain why you didn't receive an invitation." Those words fell on me like a ton of bricks. "Sarah, I'm your father. I don't need an explanation to be at the most important day of your life." "That's exactly what you don't understand," she replied with a harshness I had never heard in her voice. "I decided to invite only my real family, the people who truly matter in my new life." "Your real family," I repeated, feeling my mouth go dry. "Who is your real family if I'm not?" "The Reeds, of course. Albert, Linda, Daniel's aunts and uncles, his cousins, cultured, educated people, people who understand the world I live in now." Every word was like a slap in the face. "You, Dad, you're just too simple for this kind of event. You don't fit in with the level we want to project." I stood there motionless, looking at this woman who I had raised with my own hands, who I had protected for 26 years. "Sarah, I changed your diapers when you were a baby. I took you to the hospital every time you got sick. I worked double shifts to pay for your college. How can you tell me I'm not your real family?" "That was before, Dad. Now I have other priorities, other responsibilities. The Reeds are my future." She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, a gesture she made when she wanted to end an uncomfortable conversation. "I hope you understand. And don't make a scene tomorrow by showing up where you weren't invited." She left my house without even saying goodbye. Without a hug, without a kiss on the cheek. She just left me there, standing in the doorway, watching her drive away in the new car the Reeds had given her as an engagement present. That night was the longest of my life. I sat in the armchair where Rose and I used to plan Sarah's future, surrounded by photographs that now seemed to mock me. There was Sarah at 8, hugging me after I taught her to ride a bike. At 12, crying in my arms when some kids at school made fun of her. At 18, beaming with happiness when I helped her move into her first apartment for college. At what point had I failed as a father? When exactly did I stop being enough for the girl who had been my whole world? I took the suit out of the closet that I had tailored especially for her wedding. It was the only elegant suit I owned, the same one I had worn at my own wedding to Rose 28 years ago. I hung it on the closet door and just looked at it for hours, wondering if I was really so embarrassing that my own daughter was ashamed of me. Saturday, May 11th, dawned bright and beautiful, one of those perfect days that seemed designed for celebrations. From my window I could see the neighbors getting ready for their weekend activities. Normal families living normal lives, without daughters who had disowned them. I couldn't help it. At 4 p.m. I put on my best shirt and drove to the Majestic Hotel. I didn't intend to go in or cause problems. I just wanted to see my little girl from a distance on her wedding day, even if she had decided I didn't deserve to be there. I stood across the street, hidden behind some columns, watching the guests arrive in their luxury cars. I recognized some distant relatives who had also been excluded, but who, unlike me, hadn't dared to even come close to watch. When Sarah got out of the limousine, she looked radiant in her designer wedding dress. For a moment she stopped at the hotel entrance and looked toward where I was hiding. Our eyes met for an instant, and I swear I saw a flash of doubt in her gaze. But she immediately looked away and walked in on the arm of Albert Reed, who was doing the honor of giving her away at the altar, the place that by right belonged to me. That image was burned into my mind forever. My daughter being given away in marriage by a stranger, while her real father watched from the shadows like an intruder. I returned home with a shattered heart, but with something else, an absolute clarity about what I had to do. On Sunday, May 12th, 2024, I woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in years, I didn't have to wonder when Sarah would call or when she would come to visit. I no longer had to expect anything from her, because she had made it very clear that I was not part of her new existence. I got up early and went straight to my workshop. There, amidst the smell of wood and varnish that had been my refuge for decades, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to move on without Sarah, just as she had moved on without me. The first thing I did was take down all the photographs of Sarah that I had hanging on the workshop walls. I didn't throw them in the trash. That would have been cruel even for my wounded heart. But I stored them in a box, along with all the gifts I had made for her over the years that she had left abandoned in her old room. Rose, I murmured as I packed away the memories. Our little girl is gone. We lost her, and I have to learn to live with that. For the next few weeks I immersed myself completely in work. I accepted every order that came to my workshop. Tables, chairs, shelves, cabinets. Keeping my hands busy was the only way to keep my mind from wandering to painful memories or thoughts of what could have been different. My neighbors, Mr. Charlie Johnson and his wife Mary, started to worry about me. I had known them since Sarah was little, and they had always been like an adoptive family to us, especially after Rose's death. "Michael, you haven't left that workshop in weeks," Charlie told me one afternoon in June, peeking through the door. "Mary is worried. She says you're barely eating." "I'm fine, Charlie. Just have a lot of work," I replied, without looking up from the table I was sanding. "And Sarah? How is she adjusting to married life?" That question hit me like a punch, but I kept my composure. Sarah is living her new life. She doesn't need her old father anymore. Charlie was a wise man, with 70 years of experience in this world. He walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. "Michael, I raised 4 kids, and I'm going to tell you something I learned. Sometimes kids need to get lost to find their way back home. Not this time, Charlie. This time she's lost for good." At the end of June, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years. Travel. Rose had always dreamed of seeing the New England coast, specifically the small towns in Maine. We never had the money or the time to do it, always prioritizing Sarah's expenses. I closed the workshop for a week and went alone in my old truck. It was the first trip I had taken for pleasure in over 20 years. I walked on the beaches, visited museums, ate in local restaurants, without having to worry about the family budget. In one small town, sitting on a bench facing the Atlantic Ocean, I realized something important. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions thinking only of myself. I didn't have to consider Sarah's schedules, her needs, her whims, or her emergencies. It was a bittersweet freedom, but freedom nonetheless. When I returned home, I found 3 messages on my answering machine. None were from Sarah. 2 were from potential clients, and 1 was from my brother Anthony, who lived in Denver and called occasionally to keep in touch. Mikey, his recorded voice said. I called because I heard from the neighbors that Sarah got married. Why didn't you tell me? I would have come for the wedding. Call me when you can. I want to know how my favorite niece is doing. I didn't call him back. I didn't have the strength to explain that his favorite niece had decided the Millers weren't worthy of being part of her new aristocratic life. During July and August, I established a routine that helped me maintain my sanity. I woke up at 6, had breakfast watching the news, went to the workshop until 2, had lunch with Charlie and Mary when they invited me, and in the afternoons, I read books I had bought but never had time to read. On weekends, I explored nearby towns in my truck, always looking for new places Rose and I had never visited. It was as if I was reclaiming all those years I had lived solely for Sarah. In early September, I received an unexpected call from Jacob, a second cousin I hadn't seen in years. Michael, how are you? I heard Sarah got married. Why weren't we invited? I thought there was some mistake. There was no mistake, Jacob. Sarah decided she only wanted certain people at her wedding. What do you mean, certain people? We're family. Apparently not. At least, not the kind of family she considers appropriate now. Jacob was silent for a moment. Michael, are you okay? You sound different. I'm learning to be okay, Jacob. For the first time in years, I'm learning to live for myself. That conversation made me reflect on something important. Sarah hadn't just rejected me. She had rejected our entire extended family, all the simple, hard-working people who were part of our circle. She had chosen to cut us off like dead branches from a tree she needed to prune to grow in another direction. And I finally had accepted that choice. October arrived with the cold autumn winds, and I had found a kind of peace in my new routine. My workshop was thriving more than ever. I had a waiting list of clients who appreciated the quality of my artisanal work, and at night I slept without the constant worry of whether Sarah would need me for something. It was precisely in those quiet days that the first rumors about problems in Sarah's marriage began to reach me. I didn't look for them. They just came to my ears through that invisible gossip network that exists in every neighborhood. The first sign came from Mrs. Gable, the owner of the bakery where I bought bread every morning. Mrs. Gable was one of those women who knew everything about everyone within a 5-mile radius. Michael, she said, wrapping up my usual roles, have you heard anything from Sarah lately? No, Mrs. Gable. Sarah is very busy with her new life, I replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone. It's just, my niece Rachel works as a waitress at the Majestic Hotel restaurant, you know, where your daughter's wedding was. Mrs. Gable leaned over the counter, lowering her voice as if she were about to tell me a state secret. She says she's seen Sarah having lunch alone several times, and that she looks worried, different from how she looked on her wedding day. I feigned indifference, but that information fluttered in my mind all day. As much as I tried to convince myself that Sarah was no longer my responsibility, 26 years of paternal instincts don't just disappear overnight. A week later, while repairing a door at the Hernandez's house, I overheard another conversation that unsettled me. Mrs. Hernandez was chatting with her neighbor in the garden, and I couldn't help but hear from where I was working. Did you hear about Michael Miller's son-in-law? One of the women said. The rich guy who married Sarah? What about him? Well, it turns out Daniel Reed lost his job at the family company a month ago. Seems he had problems with Albert, his own father. My sister-in-law works at the bank where they have their account, and she says they've been withdrawing money constantly. My hammer stopped in midair. Sarah lived completely dependent on the Reeds' money. If Daniel had lost his position in the family company, that meant serious problems for their lifestyle. I finished the job in silence and returned home with that information spinning in my head. Part of me felt a bitter satisfaction, knowing the perfect family Sarah had chosen over me wasn't as solid as it seemed. But another part, the part that was still a father despite everything, worried about what this meant for her. In November, the rumors became more specific and more disturbing. Charlie, who kept in touch with several merchants downtown, came to my workshop with fresh news. Michael, I don't know if you want to know this, but tell me, Charlie. Nothing can surprise me anymore. I've heard that Daniel Reed has been frequenting bars and casinos. Apparently, since he lost his job, he's taken to drinking and gambling. My friend Ramon, the one who owns the bar near the financial district, says he's seen him there several nights, always alone, spending money like it's not his. That information hit me unexpectedly. Sarah had traded her father for a family that turned out to be a facade. She had chosen financial security over unconditional love, and now that security was crumbling. "And Sarah?" I asked, though I immediately regretted showing interest. "From what I've heard, she doesn't know anything. Daniel is hiding his problems from her. She's still living in her world of appearances while he squanders what's left of his inheritance." Over the next few weeks, I tried to stay busy, but the rumors kept coming like persistent leaks. Sarah had been seen arguing with Daniel in public. The Reeds no longer invited them to their social events. The luxurious apartment where they lived had been put up for sale. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Sarah had rejected the stability and genuine love I represented for the illusion of belonging to a higher social class, only to discover that this social class was as fragile as a house of cards. One day in December, while I was having lunch at the small diner I frequented, I heard the most revealing conversation yet. At the next table, two men in suits were sitting, clearly familiar with the Reed situation. "This thing with Albert Reed is a scandal," one of them said, firing his own son from the family business. But it was necessary. Daniel was diverting funds to cover his gambling debts. And Daniel's wife? That girl who comes from a humble family? Sarah, I think her name is. Poor thing. She has no idea what's coming. When Albert finds out everything Daniel has stolen, he's not just going to disinherit him, he's probably going to sue him. And she's going to be caught in the middle of this whole mess. I finished my lunch mechanically, processing that information. Sarah, who had chosen the supposed security of the Reeds over her father's love, was about to discover she had bet on the wrong horse. But the most important thing was this. For the first time in months, that news didn't awaken the immediate impulse in me to run and rescue her. Sarah had made her choice. She had been clear about who she considered her real family, and I had learned to respect that decision. Whatever was about to happen in Sarah's life, she would have to face it with the support of her real family, the Reeds. On Wednesday, January 15th, 2025, my quiet life was interrupted by a call I wasn't expecting. It was 3 p.m., and I was varnishing a dresser when my cell phone rang. The number wasn't registered, but something urged me to answer. "Michael Miller?" asked a female voice I didn't immediately recognize. "Yes, this is he. Who's calling?" "This is Sofia Delgado, Sarah's old college roommate. I don't know if you remember me. I came to your house a few times when we were students." I vaguely remembered her. A nice brunette girl who had been very close to Sarah during their business administration studies. "Of course, Sophia. How are you? How is everything? Michael, I'm calling because I think you should know what happened with Sarah yesterday." Her voice sounded awkward, as if she didn't know exactly how to broach the subject. My stomach tensed immediately. "What happened?" "Sarah, she got home earlier than usual from the spa where she works as a receptionist now." Sophia paused. "Yes, Michael, Sarah is working. The Reeds cut off all financial support 2 months ago when they found out what Daniel had been doing. That information surprised me. Sarah, who had lived her whole life without really working, who had considered manual labor as something beneath her, was now forced to earn a living. And what happened yesterday?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "Sarah found Daniel in bed with her best friend Christina. In their own house, Michael. In the bed they shared as a married couple. Silence stretched between us. As much as Sarah had hurt me, as much as she had chosen to humiliate and exclude me, she was still the girl I had raised, and knowing she was suffering stirred complicated emotions inside me. "Sophia, why are you telling me this? Sarah was very clear that I'm not part of her life. Because I'm worried about her, Michael. After she found Daniel with Christina, she went crazy. She yelled at him, threw things. But the worst part was his reaction. He told her she had never been enough for him, that he had only married her because of pressure from his parents, and that Christina gave him what she couldn't. I closed my eyes, imagining the pain Sarah must have felt in that moment. No matter what she had done to me, no one deserves to hear those words from the person who supposedly loves them. And then what happened? Daniel left the house with Christina that same night. He left her a note telling her to keep whatever was left. But Michael, there's almost nothing left. They've been living off the jewelry Sarah sold and her salary from the spa. The apartment is mortgaged. They have debts everywhere. And the Reeds, her in-laws? Sophia sighed deeply. That's the cruelest part. When Sarah went to Albert and Linda's house for support, they blamed her. They blamed her for not knowing how to keep Daniel interested. Linda told her point blank that a wife who can't keep her husband interested clearly doesn't deserve to be in their family. Those words filled me with an anger I hadn't felt in months. The very people Sarah had chosen over me, who she had considered superior and more worthy of her love, had abandoned her in the most difficult moment of her life. Linda told her she's no longer welcome in their house, that the Reed family name must be kept clean of scandals, and that she has to fend for herself. Albert even implied that if Sarah had come from a better family, she would have known how to handle the situation. A better family? I repeated, feeling the irony pierce me like a sword. Yes, Michael. The same people Sarah considered her real family kicked her out of their house as if she were a stranger. And the worst part is, Sarah seems to have accepted that it's all her fault. I stayed silent for several minutes, processing all this information. Sarah had lost her husband, her home, her financial stability, and the family she had chosen over her own father. She was completely alone, facing the consequences of decisions she had made with an arrogance she now probably deeply regretted. Sophia, where is Sarah now? She's still in the apartment, but only until the end of the month. After that, I have no idea. She's tried to contact some distant relatives, but apparently they are all upset because she excluded them from her wedding. She feels completely abandoned. And why are you telling me all this? Does Sarah know you're calling me? No, she knows nothing. I'm calling you because, Michael, I've known Sarah for years. I know she made terrible mistakes with you. I know she hurt you deeply. But I also know that deep down, she still loves her dad. She's just too proud to admit she was wrong. I hung up the phone and just stood there, in my workshop, surrounded by the familiar smell of wood and varnish, trying to process everything I had just heard. Sarah was experiencing exactly what I had predicted. The Reed family had used her and thrown her away as soon as she was no longer convenient. But the most important thing was this. After 8 months of mourning, of personal rebuilding, of learning to live without Sarah, was I willing to open the door again to someone who had hurt me so deeply? The answer came to my mind with crystal clarity. Not yet. On Saturday, February 22nd, 2025, my life changed unexpectedly again. It was 9 o'clock at night, and I was finishing dinner while watching the news when I heard desperate knocking on my front door. At first, I thought it might be Charlie with some emergency, but the knocking had a different intensity, more urgent, more emotional. I got up from the armchair and walked to the door. But before opening it, something made me stop and look through the living room window. It was Sarah. My daughter was standing under the faint light of the street lamp, with 2 large suitcases at her feet and tears streaming down her cheeks. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, simpler and cheaper than what she had worn in recent years. Her hair, once always perfectly styled, was messy and dull. The knocking continued, now accompanied by her broken voice. "Dad, please, open the door. It's me, Sarah. Dad, I need to talk to you." I stood motionless, watching her through the glass. For months I had imagined this moment. I had fantasized about Sarah returning home, begging for forgiveness, acknowledging her mistakes. But now that it was finally happening, I didn't feel the joy I had expected. Instead, there was a strange mixture of sadness, contained anger, and above all, absolute clarity about what I had to do. "Dad, I know you're in there. I saw the lights on. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Her voice sounded desperate, broken. "I was wrong, Dad. I was wrong about everything." I took a deep breath and opened the door, but I kept my body blocking the entrance. Sarah met my eyes, and for a moment we both stood in silence, studying each other like 2 strangers who had once known each other intimately. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, showing no particular emotion. "Dad," she sobbed, trying to move closer to hug me, but I didn't move from my position. "Dad, everything fell apart. Daniel cheated on me. The Reeds kicked me out. I lost my house. I lost everything. I have nowhere to go." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied with the same tranquility. "That must be very difficult for you." Sarah seemed confused by my neutral tone. She had probably expected me to run and comfort her, to immediately welcome her with open arms, like the father desperate to get his daughter back, which I had been for decades. "Dad, can I come in? It's cold out here and I need to talk to you. I need to apologize properly. Sarah, 8 months ago, you told me very clearly that I was not part of your real family. You excluded me from the most important day of your life because you considered me too simple, too embarrassing for your new social circle. I kept my voice serene, with no trace of pain or anger. Why do you think things are different now? Because I realized I was wrong, she cried, tears streaming. Because I understood that you were the only one who truly loved me unconditionally. The Reeds, they used me and threw me out like trash when I was no longer useful. You are my dad, the only dad I have. You're right, Sarah. I am your biological father. That will never change. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her tears intensify. But being a biological father and being family are two different things. You taught me that lesson yourself. Don't say that. You are my family. You were always my family. I was confused, I was. Sarah tried to approach again, but I held my ground. Sarah, when you decided I didn't deserve to be at your wedding, when you told me you had invited only your real family, when you made me feel ashamed of being your father for years, you made a final decision. You chose who was important in your life, and I was not on that list. I was young. I was stupid. I was influenced by Daniel and his parents, she pleaded. People make mistakes, Dad. Can't you forgive me? Can't you give me another chance? I looked at her for a long moment. This 6-year-old woman who had been the center of my universe for so long. Part of me wanted to give in. I wanted to hug her and tell her everything would be okay, that we could rebuild our relationship. But another part, the part that had learned to value itself during these months of loneliness, knew this wasn't love. It was desperation. Sarah, for 6 months you were married, living your new life with your real family. In all that time you never called me. You never worried about how I was. You never thought to visit me or include me in your happiness. I paused, letting those words sink in. Only now that you've lost everything, now that you're left all alone, now you remember you have a dad. That's not true. Of course it's true, Sarah. If Daniel hadn't cheated on you, if the Reeds hadn't kicked you out, if you still had your perfect life, would you be here right now, asking for forgiveness? Would you have ever come to tell me you missed me, or that you had made a mistake? Sarah's silence was more eloquent than any verbal answer. Then, for the first time in the entire conversation, I smiled. It wasn't a cruel or vengeful smile, it was a sad but determined smile. Sarah, when you were 5 and you fell off your bike, you ran crying to me for comfort. When you were 15 and your friends made fun of your dress at a party, you came home looking for my hug. For 26 years, every time the world hurt you, I was there to pick you up. But 8 months ago, when you had the chance to show me that I also mattered in your life, you chose something else. Dad, please, no, Sarah, not this time. And with those words, I closed the door, gently but firmly, leaving my daughter on the other side with her suitcases and her tears. For the first time in my life, I had said no to Sarah. After closing the door, I stood motionless in the entryway for several minutes, listening to Sarah's sobs on the other side. I could hear her broken voice calling me, pleading for me to reconsider, promising she had changed, that she was different, that she would do anything to regain my trust. But for the first time in 26 years, I didn't run to comfort her. I walked slowly to the living room window and carefully peeked through the curtains. Sarah was still there, sitting on my front step, her head in her hands. Her suitcases remained by her side like silent witnesses to her desperation. Every few minutes she would look up at my door, as if expecting me to change my mind at any moment and come out to rescue her. In that moment, an image came to my mind with painful clarity. Sarah, at 8 years old, after a nightmare, running barefoot down the hall to my room. Daddy, she had said then, I was scared, but I knew if I came to you, you'd be here to protect me. When exactly had I gone from being her refuge to being her embarrassment? I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where Rose and I used to plan our family's future, and I let the memories flow without censorship. I remembered all the nights I had worked late in the workshop to pay for her extra English classes, the weekends I had sacrificed my rest to take her to classmates' birthday parties, the times I had eaten less so she could have the brand name shoes she wanted so badly. But I also remembered the first symptoms of what was to come. How Sarah started to be embarrassed by my truck when I dropped her off at college. The way she stopped inviting her friends over because she found our decor outdated. The time she asked me not to pick her up from certain events because her new acquaintances might see me. There were signs. Many signs that I had ignored, because I refused to accept that my little princess was turning into a stranger. Sarah stayed outside for almost an hour. I watched her pace in circles, talk to someone on her phone, and sit back down on the steps. At one point she approached the door again and knocked, softer this time, almost timidly. "Dad, I know you can hear me. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I'm just asking you to let me explain what really happened. Please, give me 5 minutes." Her voice sounded different now, less desperate, but more broken. It was the voice of someone who was finally understanding the real consequences of her decisions. But I didn't move from my armchair. I thought about Rose, about what she would have done in this situation. Rose, who had died 3 years ago, without seeing her only daughter's wedding, because Sarah had chosen to exclude everything our family represented. Rose, who in her last days had made me promise to always love Sarah, but to never let her disrespect me. Michael, Rose had told me from her hospital bed. True love sometimes requires boundaries. If you let Sarah treat you poorly, you're not teaching her to value genuine love. Promise me that if our daughter ever hurts you deeply, you will have the courage to stand up for yourself. In that moment, sitting in the dim light of my living room, I finally understood what Rose had meant. Around 11 o'clock at night, I heard the sound of an engine. I peeked out again and saw that Sarah had called a taxi. I watched her load her suitcases into the vehicle, stopping one last time to look toward my window. For a few seconds our eyes met through the glass. She raised her hand in a gesture that seemed half goodbye, half final plea. I did not return the gesture. The taxi drove away, taking Sarah to a destination I didn't know. And for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with a decision related to my daughter. Over the next few days, I established a rigorous routine to keep myself busy and prevent guilt from overwhelming me. I got up early, worked intensively in the workshop, had lunch with Charlie when he invited me, and in the afternoons, I read or watched TV, not allowing my mind to drift towards Sarah. But the neighbors' reactions were immediate. On Tuesday morning, while buying vegetables at the local market, Mrs. Ruiz, a 75-year-old woman who had known our family for decades, approached me with a worried expression. "Michael, I heard Sarah came to see you on Saturday night, and that you didn't let her in. Is that true?" "It's true, Mrs. Ruiz. But son, she's your daughter. No matter what she did, she's your blood. How could you leave her on the street?" "Mrs. Ruiz, Sarah decided months ago that I wasn't good enough to be part of her life. I am respecting her decision, and I expect her to respect mine." The old woman looked at me with a mixture of disapproval and confusion. "We are parents, Michael. We forgive. That's what we do. Parents also deserve respect, Mrs. Ruiz. And when that respect is completely lost, forgiveness must be earned, not just given." That conversation repeated itself in different variations throughout the week. Some neighbors supported me, especially those who had witnessed Sarah's behavior toward me over the past few years. Others criticized me harshly, considering my decision too severe. But curiously, all those external opinions failed to make me doubt my choice. For the first time in my adult life, I had put my own feelings and dignity above my role as a rescuing father, and that experience was as liberating as it was terrifying. For the next 3 weeks after the encounter with Sarah, my life passed with a calm I hadn't experienced in years. I woke up in the morning without that feeling of anxiety that had accompanied me for months, wondering if Sarah was okay, if she needed me, if there was some crisis that required my intervention. Now I just got up, made my coffee, and started my day focused solely on my own responsibilities and well-being. The first hint of what Sarah was facing came through Jacob, my second cousin, who called me one Wednesday night with disturbing news. "Michael, Sarah contacted me a few days ago," he told me without preamble. "She was looking for a place to stay temporarily." "And what did you tell her?" I asked, though I already guessed the answer. "I told her I couldn't help her. Michael, not just out of solidarity with you, but frankly after how she treated all of us during her wedding, excluding us as if we were undesirable people. I have no obligation to rescue her now that things have gotten tough." Jacob paused, and I could hear the disgust in his voice as he continued. "She asked me to borrow money, Michael. I explained that my pension barely covers my living expenses, but she insisted, saying I was family, and family helps each other. Can you believe the hypocrisy? When she was doing well, we weren't family enough for her wedding, but now that she's desperate, suddenly we're family again. That information confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah was doing the exact same thing to me as she had done with the rest of our relatives. She only remembered us when she needed us. A few days later, I received a call from my brother Anthony in Denver. His tone was a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Mikey, Sarah called me yesterday crying. She told me Daniel abandoned her, and that you kicked her out of the house. What's going on over there?" I explained the whole situation to Anthony, from the wedding exclusion to the recent encounter. When I finished my story, my brother sighed deeply. "Michael, I completely understand your position. I remember when Sarah came to Denver 2 years ago for my birthday. She acted like a princess, criticized my house, my food, even made derogatory comments about my job. Mary and I were very hurt, but we thought it was just a phase." "Did Sarah ask you for help too?" I asked. "Yes. She wanted me to lend her money for a security deposit on an apartment. I told her she had to fix things with you first. I'm not going to help someone who treated their own father so badly." Anthony paused. "Besides, Michael, if you give in now, Sarah will learn that she can treat you poorly whenever she wants, because she'll know that in the end, you'll always be there to rescue her." That conversation reassured me immensely. I was not alone in my decision. The people who truly knew me and valued me understood why I had acted the way I did. At the end of March, the rumors about Sarah's situation began to circulate more freely in the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable from the bakery informed me that Sarah had gotten a job at a coffee shop downtown, earning little more than minimum wage. I saw her the other day, waiting tables. Mrs. Gable told me while packing my bread. She looked different, thinner, in simple clothes, without that expensive jewelry she always wore. When she saw me, she looked away. I think she felt ashamed. "Honest work should never shame anyone," I replied. "That's something Sarah should have learned many years ago." Mrs. Gable nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Michael. Although I must admit, part of me feels sorry for her. To go from having everything to having to start from scratch. That must be very hard." "Mrs. Gable, Sarah isn't starting from scratch because of bad luck. She's starting from scratch because she chose to trade a family that loved her unconditionally for a family that valued her only for her usefulness. Decisions have consequences, and Sarah is living hers." In April, Charlie brought me more detailed news about Sarah's situation. His nephew worked in the same building as the coffee shop and had observed Sarah for several weeks. "Michael, according to what Raoul tells me, Sarah is now living in a cheap studio apartment near downtown. It's a modest place. Nothing like the luxury apartment she lived in with Daniel." Charlie watched me carefully as he gave me this information. He also says he's seen her eating lunch alone every day, always with the same sad expression. "And are you telling me this so I'll feel sorry for her and go rescue her?" I asked directly. "No, Michael. I'm telling you because I think you have the right to know how your daughter is, even if you've decided to keep your distance." Charlie sat down on a stool in my workshop. "But I'm also going to tell you something else. Raoul has overheard Sarah's conversations with her coworkers, and apparently she's still blaming everyone except herself. She blames Daniel for cheating, the Reeds for abandoning her, and especially you for not helping her when she needed you most." That last piece of information was revealing. Sarah still hadn't taken responsibility for her own decisions. In her mind, everyone else was the villain of her story, while she was simply an innocent victim of circumstances. "Charlie, does Sarah know you're telling me this?" "No, and she doesn't need to know, but Michael, I think you made the right decision. A person who cannot recognize their mistakes can never truly change. And Sarah, from what I see, is still not ready to acknowledge that her own choices brought her to where she is." That night, as I ate dinner alone in my kitchen, I reflected on everything I had heard over those weeks. Sarah was living exactly the consequences I had predicted. Loneliness, financial hardship, and rejection from the very people she had looked down on when she believed she was superior to them. But the most important thing was, I was at peace with my decision not to rescue her this time. May 2025 arrived with an unexpected change in my routine. My carpentry business had prospered considerably during these months of personal focus. I had more orders than I could handle, and for the first time in years, I was considering hiring an assistant to expand my workshop. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Sarah struggled to survive with precarious jobs, I was experiencing one of the most prosperous periods of my professional life. It was as if, by freeing myself from the constant worry about her crises and needs, I had found the mental energy to focus completely on my own growth. One Tuesday morning, while organizing my tools, I received an unexpected visit. Sofia Delgado, Sarah's old college roommate who had called me months ago, appeared at my workshop door. "Good morning, Michael. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, Sophia. Come in, sit down." I offered her a chair and poured her a glass of fresh water. "How have you been?" "I'm fine, thanks. But I didn't come to talk about me." Sophia seemed uncomfortable, as if she were dealing with an internal dilemma. "I came to talk to you about Sarah. Sophia, if Sarah sent you to intercede for her, you can save your breath. My decision is made, and it's not going to change." "No, Michael. Sarah doesn't know I'm here. In fact, if she knew I came to see you, she would probably stop speaking to me." Sophia sighed. "I'm here because I'm worried about the direction her life is taking, but also because I think you need to know a few things." I leaned back in my work chair, preparing to hear what she had to say. "Sarah lost her job at the coffee shop last week," Sophia continued. "Apparently she had a loud argument with the manager because he asked her to clean the bathrooms, and she yelled at him that she didn't get a college degree to do cleaning jobs. That information didn't surprise me. Sarah still believed that certain types of work were beneath her, even though her circumstances had changed radically. And what is she doing now? She got a job as a saleswoman in a clothing store, but the salary is even lower. Michael, I've seen her several times in the last few weeks, and she is bitter. Very bitter." Sophia paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "She talks constantly about how life has been unfair to her, about how everyone has betrayed her. But she never, ever acknowledges that her own decisions brought her to where she is. And what does she say specifically about me? That's what worries me, Michael. She tells anyone who will listen that you are a cruel and vindictive father, that you threw her out on the street when she needed you most, that you prefer to see yourself as a victim rather than help your own daughter." Sophia looked me straight in the eyes. "But the worst part is, she seems genuinely convinced that she is the victim in this whole situation." I stayed silent for several minutes, processing that information. Sarah had not only learned nothing from this experience, but she had built a narrative where everyone else was the villain. "Sophia, why are you telling me all this?" "Because I wanted you to know that you made the right decision." Her answer surprised me. "Michael, I've known Sarah for 8 years. I've seen how she has treated people who loved her, including you. And after these months of watching her, I've realized that Sarah isn't learning humility from this experience. She's learning resentment." Sophia got up from the chair and walked to the workshop window. "There's something else you need to know. Sarah has been saying that when things get better for her, she's going to make sure that all the people who didn't help her in her time of need will pay for it. She specifically includes you. What does that mean exactly?" "I don't know, Michael, but it doesn't sound like someone who is reflecting on her mistakes and growing as a person. It sounds like someone who is planning some kind of revenge when she gets the chance." After Sophia left, I continued working in silence, but her words kept swirling in my mind. Sarah wasn't using this experience as an opportunity to grow or reconsider her values. She was using it to feed her resentment toward all the people who had refused to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices. That afternoon, while polishing a table I was building, I reflected on the personality Sarah had developed over the years. She had always had a tendency to blame others for her problems, but I had attributed that to her youth and inexperience. Now I realized it was something deeper. Sarah genuinely believed the world owed her something, that she deserved certain things without having to earn them. A week later, Charlie brought me more worrying news. His nephew Raoul had overheard Sarah talking on the phone at the store where she worked, apparently with some lawyer. "Michael, I don't know exactly what they were talking about, but Raoul managed to hear words like paternal abandonment and financial responsibility. Do you think Sarah is considering some kind of legal action against you?" That possibility disturbed me deeply, not because I feared the legal consequences. I had fulfilled all my obligations as a father for 26 years, but because it confirmed what Sophia had warned me about, Sarah wasn't looking for reconciliation or personal growth. She was looking for ways to force me to help her, even through the courts if necessary. That night, for the first time in months, I sat down to write. I documented chronologically the entire history of my relationship with Sarah, especially the events of the last few years. I included dates, witnesses, and specific circumstances. If Sarah was really considering taking me to court, I would be prepared to defend not only my actions but my right to set healthy boundaries in my own life. As I wrote, a clear realization formed in my mind. I did not regret my decision to close the door on Sarah. In fact, every new piece of information I received about her behavior and attitude confirmed that I had done the right thing. Sarah was 26 years old. She was fully capable of working, supporting herself, and building an independent life. The fact that she preferred to resent others and look for ways to force people to rescue her, instead of taking responsibility for her situation, only proved that she was not yet ready for an adult, respectful relationship with me. And until that changed, my door would remain closed. August 2025 marked exactly 1 year since Sarah had excluded me from her wedding, and 6 months since I had closed the door on her. During this time, I had experienced a personal transformation I never would have imagined possible. My workshop had become the most prosperous business I had ever had in my life. I had hired a young apprentice, David, a 9-year-old kid with a real desire to learn the trade. David reminded me of myself at that age. Humble, hardworking, grateful for every opportunity to grow. Mr. Miller, David told me one afternoon as we finished a set of furniture for an important client. My father says you're the best carpenter in the area, but he also says you're the wisest. He says you've learned to value yourself in a way that few men of your generation managed to do. His words filled me with pride, not because they flattered me, but because they confirmed something I had begun to feel. I had finally learned the difference between loving someone and allowing them to abuse that love. The last direct information about Sarah came to me through an unexpected source, my doctor, Dr. Frank Roberts. During a routine checkup, Dr. Roberts casually mentioned that he had treated a young woman last month who turned out to be my daughter. Michael, normally I wouldn't comment on other patients. But Sarah specifically asked me to tell you something, he explained, reviewing my test results. She came in for stress and anxiety. Apparently, she's working 2 jobs just to support herself. And what did she want you to tell me? That she's considering moving to New York City, that she can't get jobs here that allow her to live decently. The doctor paused, observing my reaction. She also asked me to tell you that if you change your mind about helping her, she has until the end of the month before she makes her final decision. I heard this information with the same calm I would listen to the weather forecast. Doctor, did Sarah seem different to you? More mature? More aware of her mistakes? Honestly, Michael, no. She talked a lot about how life had been unfair to her, but very little about what she could do differently to improve her situation. She seemed to be waiting for someone else to solve her problems. That was the final confirmation I needed. Sarah was still the same person she had been for years, someone who expected others to rescue her, instead of taking control of her own life. September arrived with no news from Sarah, which I interpreted as a sign that she had probably moved forward with her plans to move to New York. Curiously, that uncertainty didn't cause me any anxiety. I had learned to accept that Sarah was an adult, capable of making her own decisions and living with the consequences. One Sunday afternoon, while organizing some tools in my workshop, I found an old photograph that had fallen behind my workbench. It was a picture of Sarah at 12, smiling as she helped me varnish a small chair we had made together for her room. For the first time in months, I looked at that photograph without feeling overwhelming pain or nostalgia. Instead, I felt a kind of quiet gratitude for the good times we had shared, accompanied by the clear acceptance that this Sarah no longer existed. I put the photograph in a drawer, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I no longer needed to cling to memories of a relationship that had ended. In October, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years: update my will. For decades, Sarah had been my sole heir. But now, that situation needed to change. I visited my lawyer, Mr. Raphael Morris, who had handled my family's legal affairs for years. "Michael, are you sure about this decision?" he asked, reviewing my new instructions for the will. "Disinheriting Sarah completely is a very definitive step. Raphael, for 26 years, Sarah was my absolute priority. I invested all my love, my time, my money, and my energy in her. When she had the chance to show me that I also mattered in her life, she chose to humiliate me publicly. I kept my voice calm but firm. Sarah made her decisions as an adult. Now, I am making mine. And who will benefit from your estate? A portion to David, my apprentice, who has shown me more respect and affection in 6 months than Sarah has in the last few years. Another portion to charities that help parents abandoned by their adult children. And the rest will be distributed among my cousins and nephews who maintain their affection for me, despite Sarah's contempt. Signing those documents was liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on who truly valued me, not on one-sided family obligations. November brought with it a sense of final closure. 8 months had passed since my last encounter with Sarah, and I had built a full and satisfying life without her. One afternoon, while having coffee with Charlie in his garden, my old friend made an observation that deeply marked me. "Michael, do you know what impresses me most about what you've been through this year?" "What's that, Charlie?" "That you learned to love yourself as much as you loved Sarah." "That's something very few parents manage to do." Charlie smiled wisely. "For years I watched you sacrifice everything for her, even your own dignity. Now, I see a man who understands that true love includes self-love." Those words resonated in my heart because they captured exactly what I had learned during these months. I had discovered that loving someone doesn't mean letting them mistreat you. I had learned that being a good father doesn't mean being unconditionally available to rescue an adult child from the consequences of their own choices. And above all, I had understood that my value as a person did not depend on being needed by Sarah. At the end of the year, as I reflected on everything I had lived through, I realized something fundamental. Sarah had done me a favor by excluding me from her wedding. She had forced me to face a reality I had been avoiding for years, that our relationship was toxic and one-sided. Now, I lived with an inner peace I hadn't experienced in decades. I worked because I enjoyed it, not because I had to support an adult daughter. I made decisions thinking about my own well-being, not just Sarah's needs. And I slept peacefully every night, knowing I had chosen dignity over codependency. If Sarah ever decided to genuinely grow as a person, if she ever came to truly understand the damage she had caused and was willing to build a relationship based on mutual respect, my heart would be open to that possibility. But until that day, if it ever came, I would continue living the full and satisfying life I had built without her, because I had finally learned that sometimes saying no is the most loving act a parent can perform. If you liked this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.